Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining me. So today it seems like there's been a lot that's going on in the tech world. There's been multiple announcements of layoffs due to the economy. And so it kind of got me thinking today is going to be just a little off the wall podcast, kind of more of a commentary on the tech world. As some of you as my listeners may know, I currently work in the tech environment. I'm currently at Google, but I've had the distinct pleasure of working at Apple and Facebook as well. And so I've been in the tech industry going on 12 years and have worked for 3 of some of the largest tech companies in the world. And so today, what I ask you to do is join me on this journey as I share my insights into the tech environment, while also pouring my heart out to those that are affected. So that's our conversation today. Thanks for being here. I'm your host, Eli Albalos, and this is Eli's Echo. So yeah, today is going to be a little bit off the cuff. A handful of things, and the reason why. Well, one is it has been a very busy week on the business front for me. I have experienced my own fits this week, or fear in transition, and definitely fear of false events appearing real. I just have a lot of companies that I'm launching right now. Not a lot. I have a few. And it's just taking a lot of effort on top of still maintaining, my day job, on top of making sure that I'm completing school assignments. And I think honestly, that's probably one of the reasons why this week feels worse, is that I'm ending my this term for fall term for my doctorate program. And I completed my chapter 2 last week. And it's just, the work is getting worse, if you will, for the dissertation. It's definitely one of the hardest academic things I've ever done. And so there's a reason why people don't always pursue the PhD or the EDD to get those initials. But ultimately, I still think anybody can do it. It just takes effort. It really, really does. And I'm so thankful for my cohort at USC. So if any fellow Trojans are out there listening, fight on. Hashtag NDLB, no doctor left behind. But we'll pursue this through this. We'll persevere together, I think, is their safety in numbers, and certainly working in a cohort has really, really been helpful. So anyway, so I think that's been adding to a fuel to the fire. But what I wanted to try and do is figure out the best way to start sharing some of my insight into the tech world. A lot of my experience when it comes to leadership and motivation and a desire to get my message out there, and certainly the basis for what I developed, what I call CARE, as a leader, right? So I talked about CARE a handful of weeks ago when I gave a little bit of insight into my book that I'm publishing. But certainly my principles of CARE for concern, authenticity, realism, and empathy came from my work as a leader in the tech environment. And so today I kind of just want to give a little bit of insight into my thoughts there, into that industry, and then how that connects to several of the announcements that we're hearing within tech. So I'm going to do the best I can. I'm really shooting from the hip. I didn't really put anything on paper. I'll kind of start from the last slide it's kind of my mentality. I always say, when it comes to presentations or executive presentations, I want the last slide first. Basically, tell me the ending. And then based on that story, I might want more context, and I might want you to walk me through to the beginning. But there you go. One tip for those aspiring leaders out there is look at your communication style, particularly that of your senior leaders, and determine how they want information. Some people like the rabbit trail, right? Take me A through Z. I want Z first. Tell me the end of the story, and then let's work backwards from there. So I'm going to do that for you all today is we're going to give you the last slide first, start at the end. So the end for listeners is the announcement that was made by Meta. I keep saying Facebook because when I was there, it was Facebook. So you know what, for hopefully the remainder of this podcast, I'm going to refer to them as Facebook because then I'm speaking historically and not present tense. But, you know, present tense, Meta announced that they had to unfortunately do a reduction in force. And they're not the only tech company, right? Again, this kind of goes into the message. Stripe made the same announcement a few weeks back. Meta did now this week. But the reason why the Meta announcement hit hard is because when I was at Facebook, and now I'm going historically speaking using Facebook, hey, you know, if I can't keep you all entertained or at least a little bit distracted, then hey, I'm not doing my job, I think. But anyhow, within those announcements, there was a handful of individuals that were affected that I feel responsible for in a way. Because when I was at Facebook, we had a program where we offered full-time roles at the company, and we brought on a number of individuals from the local community in Menlo Park and, you know, really changed some lives. And Facebook did a fantastic thing when they did that. And the way they did that is they reached out to the local surrounding community and, you know, hired and converted folks that were literally from Palo Alto area, Menlo Park, that were maybe impacted because of gentrification, right? Because you get this huge tech company in the area and that's now driving up housing prices. So Facebook is like, hey, let's give something back to the community. We're not all about just taking property and rising prices. So, you know, I was part of a team that converted over, 50 or so folks, maybe 75. The number was large. I can't remember now. Folks from the local community into these full-time roles as employees. And for those that aren't aware, and this is kind of the purpose of the podcast, I guess, today, is to kind of give some insight in the tech world. So the tech world, for those that don't know, has a primary workforce that is contracted, right? So you get vendors that are there for short-term work, and then you get contractors, you know, so Facebook will contract with, let's say, like a cleaning company, and that staff that does the cleaning are not Facebook employees, they're contracted. But the reason why that's significant is as a Facebook employee, like I was, your benefits and pay are astronomically different in some cases. Not always, but benefits alone are so much different in a tech company. So, you know, some folks really aspire to use those contracted roles or vendor roles as a springboard into some of these full-time positions. And so in that sense, some of these roles are coveted. So when Facebook did this initiative going back 2 years ago now, about 2 years ago. No, sorry. Wow. Time flies. Going back 5 years ago. Wow. That's a long time. Anyhow, I was part of that team that were able to reach out to the community. I sat on a community board. I spoke about the roles. And we were able to bring on board a handful of folks from the local community. And it was amazing, right? It wasn't this typical, it's a full-time, you know, tech job, which again are coveted because of the pay, the benefits, you know, where people are applying from outer, you know, Silicon Valley area and driving in every day, similar to what like engineers do. No, like literally our targeted focus was people that live in the vicinity that could be impacted or may have been impacted by this gentrification, you know, these rising prices in houses and cost of living. So that's kind of a way to give back. And so it was really, really neat initiative. So this week when Facebook announced that they were doing layoffs, I'm part of, I'm on LinkedIn and have a fairly large LinkedIn connection group. I've had a LinkedIn profile for going on 10 years. So my connections are very broad and wide and consist of a lot of folks that are, from the previous companies I worked for. So I said I was watching on on LinkedIn, all these announcements of people that were impacted. And lo and behold, some of the folks that that were on LinkedIn that were posting were these folks that I was part of this transition group for. And so that really hit me, that really hit me this week. And so, again, I feel obligated to these individuals because I say we, because I was part of that team that did this and selected these people. But I could see the change in the lives of these individuals we were bringing on board. Like this was a life-changing event, and it was amazing to be a part of. And so when I read those announcements this week, it really kind of hit home. You can't control the economy. I understand that. But, rewinding the clock to seeing some of these smiling faces and these bright futures they were going to have with these tech companies, even though I'm not with Facebook anymore, I still felt a little bit of responsibility for these individuals. And so, through my company, I'm offering, free coaching, career coaching and mentoring sessions for some of these folks. And I really hope a lot of them reach out. But, again, the purpose is it's not about me. It really is that's just my desire, is to help these individuals, and if I can help them through some of this coaching, or, again, for the listeners out there, just, if there's anything that I say that can resonate and help folks through these troubling times, that's the whole purpose of doing this, But, again, so all those actions this week kind of led me to I should try and find a way to start sharing some of my experience about the tech environment. And my social media manager, Art Recca, look her up on Instagram, amazing stuff. She recommended hey, that's pretty cool niche. And there's a significant age, not significant, there's a decent age gap between me and Art Recca. And so it's really neat getting her perspective, because she's like, look, there's people out there that would love to maybe hear some of this information about tech companies. She goes, I know I would. And she's, very bright, just graduated with her bachelor's degree from UC Irvine. So I'm like, well, there's probably something to that. If there's a way for me to kind of share more information about tech world, let me figure out the best way. And I've been hesitant to do that up till now, because there's a fine line, folks. And I'm telling you right now, I still work in this environment. So there's only so much transparency I can have with regard to what I do. So I won't talk about my job, right? So I am at Google. That's as much as I'll share, but I won't talk about my current job or my role. But I can talk about and reflect on past experiences and talk about the tech environment in general. But it is interesting figuring out the best way to kind of share information without polarizing any of my existing relationships in tech. And I'm not going to say anything derogatory, right? It's not like I'm going to start slamming, but it is just because of my profession. I just have to be careful about the kind of things that I share and how I share it. But I think I can do that as this week, using kind of this segue from, the actions that are happening in tech companies. And so I'm going to do my best to do that, and also provide information for you all today that's worthwhile and it's worthy of listening. So the tech world, right? So as we start, if I rewind the clock, I said I've been in it going on, it'll be 13 years. So next year it'll be 13 years that I've been in tech. So a little bit about my background. If you haven't heard my previous podcasts, I started in law enforcement. So I have 10 years in law enforcement experience under my belt. And then I went, started my own business in 2008. Didn't go great. I didn't expect that to rhyme, but it did. Anyway, I started my own business in 2008, leaving law enforcement. And then in 2010, or all aware, 2008 was the worst time to open a business, probably. I had to close the doors to that business in 2010. And while I love law enforcement, I didn't want to go back to that field. I wanted something different for myself. And so I never had intent on going into the tech environment. I really didn't. In a way, if I went in the way back machine, one of the early jobs when I arrived in San Jose, California, was working as a security guard at Adobe Systems. Now, I guess I should give a little caveat. A lot of the stuff too, you'll actually find in my book next year. I kind of walk you through the full story, but I'm just kind of hitting high points. But anyway, when I did start security, but I think I was 19 years old. I was working as a security guard. I did work at Adobe Systems in San Jose, California, at their headquarters. And that was like my first foot into the door of a tech building. I had no idea what tech was. And you all have to understand, that was in 1998. So a little while ago. But I loved the environment. It's even just being a guard for this cool company and looking at all these like fancy holiday parties. And like, that was the first time I ever got free soda at work. Like that was a really big deal for me when I was like 18. Like I got free soda. So I did get exposed to tech really, really early on. And I was like, man, it would be cool to get here. But I didn't have the experience or the ability to get into that. And that might be the topic of a whole new podcast of how you get into the tech environment. But anyhow, so, now we're back at 2010 and I was trying to figure out, okay, what do I want to do? Like, I don't want to go back into law enforcement. I love the career. I love the job. I love the job. I love the experience I got out of it, but I felt like I wanted something different. So, I found myself back into contract security work and got hired on as a manager for a security company working at Apple. And so then I was contracted working as an app manager at Apple and kind of just figuring stuff out. Like, I went from law enforcement to running my own business to now I was working as a security manager overseeing people. And I really hadn't done that a whole lot. So that was kind of like where I really started to get into the tech environment. And after doing that management job, it was a year and a half. I guess I did it good enough and made enough connections with the employees, and they appreciated my work where, I was asked to apply for a corporate security manager role, which is a internal company role in that environment at Apple. And so I was hired for that role. And what's interesting, and I'll touch on it here just a little bit, is, I still have my former law enforcement colleagues that'll reach out to me that are coming up on their retirement years. And that hurdle, and I call it a hurdle purposely because it's really hard, that hurdle of transitioning from the public sector, be it like government, law enforcement, or even just outside as an outside person, from that public sector into an internal corporate position, it's not an easy step. And believe it or not, like I have a peer of mine who I met at Facebook. He has a book out there and it actually talks about like specifically for like corporate security professionals, but I'm sure it's for the same for anybody, is how do you translate your work experience outside of a tech company to tech language if you've never actually worked for tech? So that's a huge hurdle for folks. And for some of you that are listening might be in that same boat where you're like, maybe I want to be a graphic designer, but I want to get into the tech environment because I love Adobe, or I love programming and I want to be, an engineer. Like, it's that initial step, that hurdle of getting into tech is the hardest part. And that's really important for this conversation today, because if I go back to the beginning of the conversation, that program that I was a part of at Facebook that converted those employees over, that was their hurdle, right? We got folks over that hurdle of how do I go from a contracted position outside of a tech company into tech? And when you do that, your opportunities open up in that company. And quite frankly, they also open up in your ability to transfer to other tech companies, which will be part of my kind of like journey in today's conversation as I illustrate some of that. So that's really important to know. And I won't go over the ins and outs of like how to overcome that and whatnot. There's all kinds of different methods, but I just want to highlight that because in 2010, I was hired as contract work, not expecting to be an employee. That wasn't my goal. I wasn't like, oh, I'm going to go work contracted for a year and a half and then I'm going to get hired. Like I had no idea. I was like, I need this job. It's a cool job, cool company. Let me get it. And I did my job well enough that I got recognized. And then I was able to convert that recognition and experience into the opportunity to become an employee. So when that happened in Apple, that was in 2012 when I became an employee there at Apple. So I'd been there since 2010, and then a year and a half later was 2012 hired as an employee. That was really kind of the real start of my corporate experience. Yes, I was getting exposed to the corporate environment for that year and a half as a vendor. But in 2012, when I actually stepped foot as an employee and got the responsibilities of an employee for my job, that was an eye-opening experience, right? And so I'm sure for those folks that had that announcement this week from Meta, they were in that same boat. We're like, oh, I made that hurdle, but now I got to learn about this job because this could help springboard me to other roles. And so again, this is the stuff that was happening through my mind this week. And hopefully you're able to follow the conversation. I didn't prep any of this. I really hope it sounds there's a clear point here. But these are the kind of things that were rolling through my head as I heard that announcement about my Facebook colleagues. Is like, man, like we brought them in, they got into that environment, and they had this opportunity, and now unfortunately the opportunity is gone. But that's where I was at Apple. I'm like, man, I had this opportunity. And I was very fortunate, again, as a faith-based leader, like I've definitely prayed about it and thankful, because what I accomplished I think I was an employee for 4 years total, 4.5 years before I left, was amazing. Nothing short of amazing. And I think that was what I recognized first about, as I look back, about the tech environment. If you're willing to put up with the grind of the work and you're open and humble about potentially failing and honest when you do fail and are able to learn and apply those learning lessons in the tech environment, you can do well. And if you do well, you will have many doors open to you. But it's not easy by any means. You know, what's interesting, and one of the things I do love about the tech environment is there are obviously the tangible benefits, right? Great salary, great health benefits. Like I am so thankful my health benefits have covered so many things for my family. And I pay a fraction of what I would if I was outside, if I had that same insurance plan outside of tech. Not to mention law enforcement would have been astronomical price. So it's those things that companies do, those tangible benefits that are rewarding, right? But all those tangible benefits come with a price. They really do. You know, the main ticket to entry, that price, is performance. You better be good at what you do, right? That's the bottom line. If you get hired by these tech companies, already that's significant. That means you are probably within the top 10% of your talent pool, right? Because they don't hire slouches. Like if you get selected and you get hired, there's a reason why. So that in and of itself is a huge accomplishment. But you better believe that because you got hired doesn't make things easier. You are going to have to perform. And so if you're into that type of environment, like I didn't realize I was actually really into it, like I enjoyed it, then, you know, the tech environment is going to be great for you. But if you're not into the grind, you know, and not to say you have to live and breathe the job. Like that's one thing is there's this, you do have to find that fine balance, right? We all work to live. We don't live to work. But there's ebbs and flows in tech. It depends on your role, right? If you're finance, end of the year, beginning of the real year, and once every quarter, you're probably going to be pretty busy, right? If you're in design, you're going to have ebb and flows of the year when you have like product releases. Like I'm not going to go into all the details of product releases, but I think you all can look at news and look at Apple and look at Google's and figure out, like, you know, there's a lot that goes into these product releases, but it ebbs and flows. The work ebbs and flows. So it's not like every single minute of the day you're super busy and, you know, working 10, 12-hour days. Maybe some people do. I certainly hope that's not the case for everybody every single time. But the bottom line is it's a challenging environment, and you're gonna earn your way, right? It's all on you. And so when I got in that environment, I was really starting to soak everything in. And without going into all the details at Apple, you know, basically in 4.5 years, I did things, I saw things, and I went places I will never probably ever go or do again, right? So like, you know, one example is when I was there, I built up enough reputation where there was this desire to, actually, let me go back just, you know, to maybe 10 seconds. When I was there right at the transition from when Steve Jobs passed and turned over the reins to Tim Cook. And so I was able to be there, part of that cultural shift. And so it was, again, historical time to be where I was and to witness and see basically the changing of the guard. And so that was, I reflect back and really, fond of that time. It was a busy time. It was a lot of work, but it was really, really neat to see. But that shift, that change in the guard happened right when I converted into an employee. And so what was interesting is in that 4.5 years following when I got hired, as I mentioned, I just took part in so many things. But one of the biggest things that I think still sits with me today is, I was asked to start the executive protection program for Tim Cook at Apple. It was me. And what was interesting, I was asked to do it for only 2 months, because that was not my experience. I'd never done that kind of stuff before, but I was smart enough and had enough experience from law enforcement, and had enough training under my belt with regard to protection that like, okay, you can do this for a short time, but it was like, hey, do this for 2 months and we're going to hire a director. Fine. Like I'll do it because I have never done that. So that's definitely not a role for me. But that 2 months turned into 1.5 years. And I'll be honest, like, when I talked about the competitiveness and the need to perform, that 1.5 years building an executive protection program for one of the most recognized CEOs in the world. Not only was it just an EP, executive protection program, I built a residential program, I built a travel program. And it nearly broke me. Yeah, it nearly broke me. My marriage suffered. My well-being suffered for sure. That was one of the few times where I was working 10 or 12 hour days every single day, because it was just me for a 1.5 years, where I was asked to build this program temporarily, but because I was supposed to only be in there temporarily, I couldn't get the resources that I needed. And so I had to come up with very unique ways of accomplishing a mission, which is how I met Christian West, which he was on my podcast 2 weeks ago, who's an executive protection professional, fantastic guy. But he was a company I found at the time that helped provide me with contractor work globally. So again, it kind of gets back to this contractor state where, tech companies leverage contractors on a regular basis. And trust me, Christian and I, that's how we got close. He was on my podcast 2 weeks ago. If you haven't heard it, I definitely recommend it. You listening to this man. He is very, very intelligent and good at his job. And he basically became a mentor where, the only reason I think I was so successful at what I was is I had the drive to find and partner with people that were not only like-minded, but smarter than me in the industry. And that's what sent me to Christian. And with his partnership, I was able to successfully deliver this program in 1.5 years. But again, the thought logic in today's podcast is kind of circular, right? It's that be a contractor, get hired, do a good job. Now you're embedded in tech company, but the tech company is really going to push you and take all of your experience, all your skills, and push them to the max. And so, it was an interesting time, there's so much I can talk about with Apple, but I'm not going to because some of it I can't talk about even still. But, that experience was great for me because it taught me a couple things. One, it showed me what my limit was. And after 1.5 years, when they did finally find a director, I was asked if I wanted to continue in the role. And my answer was no, I couldn't. I had put my family, my relationship, my well-being on the back burner because I had to deliver this program. And for me, folks, if you haven't really understood this yet, just by listening to my podcast, you have to understand too, I really take things to heart. And when I commit, I commit. So when I committed to this role, it wasn't just about like, oh yeah, look at me. I'm building out, this executive protection program. I'm the executive protection lead for Apple. And no one has ever done what I did, that is true. No one can ever say they started the executive protection program other than me. Someone else might run it. I built it. Anyway. But it wasn't just like this little, badge of honor. Like, look at me, look what I did. Look how great I am in sacrificing. Like, no, for me, it was about Tim. It was about the CEO. Not because he was the CEO of Apple, not because of this, not because of that, because my role was build a program to make things easier and safer for him. End of story. And that's what I committed to. And I did it. And I did it well. And what's interesting is because I did it well, I learned so much about leaders. Like I spent so much time alongside him in his business doings, some of his personal life, on planes and cars, on private jets around the world. It all sounds fancy and stuff, but little insight. If you're on a long flight on a private jet with one toilet, let me tell you right now, there's certain things you're afraid to do in that toilet, and you have to watch your diet very closely so that you don't have to do it on a plane. Anyway, I threw that in there. But I learned so much about leadership and leaders and managing a company. And so, yeah, it was rewarding for me. It wasn't just about like, let me just wear this badge of honor. Like, oh, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do it well. And look at me. Like, no, it was like, I had a job to do. I had a person to protect. And so I took it serious. But because of that, I also learned, like I mentioned, my limits. And so when I was asked to continue, I said, well, no, I couldn't. I had to refocus my life. So after I left that program, I only was on with Apple for about another, I think it was another year and a half, maybe. And it was time for me to change roles. And so leaving Apple, I actually took like a 3-month sabbatical. I needed time off to realign my priorities, to, recenter myself, connect with my family again. And so I took 3 months off, not really knowing where I was going to end up, right? That kind of faith-based, person that I am. I knew it was the right thing to do to leave. I knew I needed time off, but I knew it was going to work out. And so I reconnected, with my wife and, my family, and just really got back down, focused on myself. And then, oh man, I'm at 28 minutes. Sorry to add that there. I haven't realized, I guess, some of this huge narrative here. Anyway, bear with me. Hopefully you can listen to this. So, during that 3 months, I started searching for jobs, not knowing where I was going to go. And I found Facebook, right? So, I was fortunate enough to be hired right at the end of that 3-month period. I gave myself 3 months off sabbatical. And again, I'm a faith-based person, so I can say this, God provides. And so I started with started with Facebook at the end of my 3-month little sabbatical, and then worked for one of the most amazing managers I've ever had. That was an inspiration for me. And she really, really inspired me and motivated me. And I actually mentioned her a couple times in my book. And so the book isn't on tour yet. It's still at the editor. So I'm not trying to make these plugs. I'm just being honest. So I really enjoyed my time at Facebook. And while I didn't do anything as grandiose as building an EP program, there were several things that I did that were kind of cool that I won't talk about ever, because they're confidential. But the most rewarding program was that program where we were able to convert those contractors into employees. And so, it kind of brings us to, back full circle to my time, at Facebook working with this group, is even in just my little narrative, hopefully what I've been able to paint is just a small picture into one portion of my experience of tech. And again, I can highlight some more as my podcasts grow. But, for me, again, it's that ability to go from contractor to employee, that if you really do enjoy the tech environment, that can be life-changing. For me, honestly, the reason why I've been able to succeed at 3 of these tech companies is, one, I'm good at my job, right? And I'm humble. I'm not bragging, but the bottom line is seriously, like if you are pursuing these tech companies, you better be good at what you do. Like I just told you, like you're going to be hired, out of the top 10% of any recruiting pool, and sometimes the margins are even slimmer depending on the role you're going up for. So again, in the most humblest of ways, I am good at what I do. Otherwise I would not have been hired at 3 different tech companies and succeeded. That's just the bottom line. But the other thing is, you have to have that drive to deal with it, right? And that is really what is make or break. Is not only do you have to be good at what you do, But you have to have that drive that once you get in, you're going to succeed, because there's so many challenges in the tech environment. And you either thrive in it and enjoy it, or it eats away at you and you're done with it. Right? So the folks that right now are being impacted by this change, one, I do hope that a handful of them reach out, because I honestly want to figure out what I can do to help folks get that next chapter. Maybe it's something that's entrepreneurial, right? Maybe it's something that's outside the industry, outside of tech, in a private nonprofit organization, who knows? But the good thing is, maybe the positive is, once you do work in these types of environments, in a tech environment, and if you do well and you gain skills and you improve yourself, like, that's the one thing that I can honestly say to folks as you're listening, is even if you step foot through the door and get into these tech companies, never stop growing. I finished a bachelor's degree, a master's degree. I'm going to finish a doctorate through this tech journey, right? I haven't stopped learning, right? I have professional certificates, like a certified protection professional, a CPP, which is in a security industry recognized certification, right? I didn't stop learning. I've never stopped learning. And so that's the one thing, as I'm kind of getting towards the end of this conversation here, with the tech environment, you have to understand is, one, it's highly influenced by the economy. We're seeing that. We're hearing that right now with all these layoffs and these cuts and these reductions, right? So it's no surprise that this stuff is coming down the pipe. So it's highly influenced by the economy. Two, when you're in, the work isn't done. Like, just because you get hired, you can't sit back and go, oh, cruise control, I'm in. Like, what's up, people? Like, look at me. Like, no. Like, honestly, as hard as it is to get into the environment, the work doesn't even start until you're actually in it. Like, there's so much to be done in the job, in this industry of tech, that is only the beginning. And so knowing that, the third thing is, you can't stop learning. You can't. If it means that you're taking on new stretch projects and stretch programs that take you beyond your current skill set, if it means that you're seeking additional certifications, if it means you're seeking a degree, an additional degree, you can't stop learning, because, and the fourth and final thing, you're replaceable, right? You are. And I don't mean that in such a negative turn, going, oh, well, I'm not going to, give my dedication to a company if I'm replaceable. The bottom line is, everybody's replaceable. Everybody is replaceable. But I think what happens is, in the tech environment, people float the most, because tech companies are there to earn profit for shareholders. That's the bottom line. And that's something that, if you're going into this industry, you have to understand and take away, is the company is there to make money for those shareholders. And when they don't, they have to take actions that will improve that profit margin. And if it means, unfortunately, there's layoffs, yeah, people are expendable. But the great thing is, I know it's a weird thing to say, the great thing is, if we look at a person's role, one, if you get into tech environment, boom, that tells you right there, you're better than most. That's a stripe to put on your shoulder. The second, if you survived and thrived while the company was doing well, then hopefully you're getting more education, you're getting more skills, you're expanding opportunities in that existing job. Because if and when it's time to change, either you change by decision, now it's time for me to leave, or by forcefulness, unfortunately you have to go, you have that mixed bag of expertise, now talent, that you can be more marketable to other tech companies. And here's a little secret for those that don't know. If you've worked in one tech company and did a good job, it's easier for you to get into another. Right? It's not a secret sauce, but literally ultimately people in tech respect someone else's experience from tech. So again, even though there's all these changes going on, if someone is impacted by these decisions, if you have that tech stripe on your shoulder and you've grown skill sets, you've gotten additional education, ideally and hopefully, it'll be easier to find another role in another tech environment. And again, nothing's guaranteed, but quite frankly, I didn't plan to jump companies just to get company names on a resume. It happened organically. But I can tell you, it happened organically because I was successful at the first tech company, and then the second, and now the third. So full circle as we come around. This is my longest podcast, so I thank you if you're hanging in with me, because again, it was shooting from the hip, and I had no idea where I was going to go with these tech company talks. And I'll add a couple more here and there. Again, I just have to be sensitive about how much I reveal and talk about. But for those folks that were impacted this week, my heart goes out to my former, Facebook colleagues when I was at Facebook. And I really hope that some of those folks, if they get this message, they listen, they look me up, and I really hope that I can help them. But to everybody else, just understand, this is the reality of tech, is in these harder economic times, people are expendable. But it's not a forever thing, right? I think we can all recognize, historically speaking, recessions come and go. So, things will be better again. And if you thrived in the tech environment, enjoyed it, made opportunity for yourself, got those skills, got those certifications, even though things are grim right now, it hopefully won't be forever. And either some of these, my former colleagues, will have an opportunity to get picked up by another tech company relatively quickly. Or if not, they still have those transferable skills where they're marketable in other industries. And when things do turn around, because they will, and tech companies are now back in need of these talented pool of individuals, these people are in a very, very good situation. Now, it's hard to look back now and go, well, great, that's going to help me maybe in a year or two, Eli. What do I do now? There's a lot to do. I have a podcast full of information on what to do about being an entrepreneur, starting your own business, maybe finding a new industry, but just ultimately don't let fear get in the way, right? Don't let false events appearing real. Don't let this fear in transition get in your way. Right now, for some of my folks that are listening to this that may be impacted, this is a great opportunity, right? Where now they are now forced to pursue maybe some of these other passions that they would not have otherwise. And so, again, I think is just my condolences do go out to the tech community for those folks that are impacted. I have a close friend of mine that's also impacted by Stripe, about a month ago. And so, my prayers go out to folks, but this is not the end of a story. I think it's the beginning of a new chapter. So that's it for me. As I sign off, one thing that I'd like to apologize for is last week I had mentioned my friend Stormy had done a audio track for me, MP4, and I guess I messed the audio gain too much on the YouTube video, because the YouTube, it didn't show, or you couldn't hear his song. So I'm going to do my best to make sure I fix that this week. So my apologies to Stormy, because if you listen to my YouTube, his audio track wasn't there. It was on the podcast if you just listen through Audible or Spotify or Apple Podcast. But hopefully, again, my apologies, you'll hear his track on YouTube. Stormy, good friend of mine. Watch last week's podcast if you want to figure out why I'm mentioning that specific call out. But anyhow, as I wrap up, again, my hearts and thoughts go out to those that were affected by all the layoffs this week. I give a call to action for all of you. Do me a favor. Subscribe where you're at, wherever you're listening to me at, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcast, Anchor. Hit a subscribe button, leave a comment wherever you're catching me at. Those really do go a long way. Find me on LinkedIn. If you were impacted and want to chat, find me on LinkedIn. If you weren't impacted and just want some career advice or life coaching or mentoring, reach out to me. It doesn't hurt to shoot an email to me. Find me on LinkedIn. You can get my email off my websites. All the links are on my descriptions. The worst thing that happens is you reach out, we don't find a good fit, and maybe I can point you somewhere else. The best thing that can happen is maybe I can say something or give you a little tidbit of information that can help you on your new chapter. So last thing is, do me a favor, please call up a friend, a family member, and give a hug, have a conversation, express your thoughts, and tell someone you love them. You never know how much time you have left on this world, and don't miss that opportunity. So that's it from me. I'm your host, Eli Albalos, and this is Eli's Echo. Thank you.